Hello, everyone. This is Daniel, and this is going to be the first part of my series called Preparing for the End Times. This is a series that is going to be dealing with how do we as Christians prepare for the end times? How do we prepare for what is coming? And how do we live good Christian lives in general? This is a very important topic because there are many events that are transpiring throughout the world and throughout recent history that seem to indicate to us that times are definitely changing and that the time for Jesus coming back is certainly much sooner than it has been before, which might be quite an obvious statement, but nevertheless, um, this first part is going to deal with signs of the times. That's going to be the title of it, and in this part, we are going to deal with exactly are the things that are happening throughout recent history that indicate to us that that the end might be near, but more so to give us a context as to what point in history are we Christians living today in. And I think after we examine the evidence, we'll see that we are very close to the coming of Jesus. And without further ado, we are going to get started. We are going to start off with a proclamation in the style and spirit of Mr. Prince, the Bible teacher that I like to follow a lot. So our proclamation is going to come from 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 through 12, and it says this: "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat." And so that verse right there really tells us what the end is. It gives us a picture of how intense the end is going to be, but more so, this is going to be a verse that is the crux of this entire series, because what this series is going to really encourage you to do is to be that person who has holy conduct and is filled with the Holy Spirit and is full of godliness. So we are going to, that's what this series is going to take care of, and that right there is a perfect verse, I think, to open this up with. So, what is the first thing we need to discuss with this? Well, first of all, we need to discuss what is the importance of end time prophecy. What is the importance of looking at what happens towards the end of time? And our answer for that comes from 2 Peter 1:9. And it says, "And so we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to heed, as a light that shines in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts." Now, Mr. Prince did a good job of explaining what this verse means, and basically what he said about this is that this verse tells us, first of all, that the prophetic word is a light that shines in a dark place. And this is important because if we do not heed the prophetic word, if we do not listen to what the prophecies are about the end times, we are in the dark because things will begin to happen. Pressures will start to increase, and we will have no idea what's going on. And this is why it's so critical for us to understand what are the end times about, what can we expect, so we can be prepared for it, and so that we will not make a mistake as we go through it. The second thing, and the interesting thing about this verse, is that it says, quote, "until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts." And Derek Prince made the point that whenever he was in the Middle East, he noticed that at certain times in the year, right before the sun rises, there was a very bright star that would appear on the horizon, and that is called the morning star. And what that morning star indicated was that as soon as you saw that star rise, the next thing you were going to see rise is the sun. And so this picture is painted for us that when we begin to see the prophecies happen, when we see that morning star appear, we know the next thing is that sun is going to rise. That Son of God is going to come on this earth and reign forever and ever. And so that is why we need to heed what the Bible has to say about prophecy. So, what does it say about the end times? Well, this is where we get into the meat of this. This section is called Signs of the Times, and we are going to examine at what point in history are we as Christians living in. Well, there are a couple of characteristics that are accompanying where we are as a society. Whenever we begin to look at certain characteristics of a society and we see where are they morally, where are they spiritually, that is a great indicator to tell us where we are headed down as a globe, as a nation, as a community. And there are five things. There are five things that are listed in my outline regarding what are five aspects that we can look at in order to discern at what point in time are we living in. The first one of these is that the Bible is very clear that the character of human beings is going to decrease as time goes on. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1 through 9, with the addition of verse 13, it says, Paul writes this, he says, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. And from such people turn away, for this is the sort for of this sort are those who creep into the households and make captives of gullible women, loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Now, as Jannes and Jambres resisted Moses, those are the two magicians that resisted Moses, so do these also resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds, disapproved concerning the faith, but they will progress no further, for their folly will be manifest to all, as theirs also was. And in verse 13 it says, quote, "But evil men and impostors will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived." So right there, Paul gives us a description of what humanity is going to look like in the last days. When those perilous times come, they're going to be lovers of themselves. We're going to love money. Look at the music. I point out, look at the music that our society generates, our contemporary American society. We produce music that is full of the love of money, full of boasting, proud, full of blasphemy in them, full of unholiness, of being unloving, of being without self-control, about being brutal, despising good, being headstrong, haughty, and lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. If you just want to see how a society is morally, look at the music. Look at the music, because that is one thing that we as humans tend to enjoy the most. It's music. So you look at the music to see where the society is morally, and it's not in a good place. We are certainly in a place that is not good when it comes to this. We are certainly not, as a nation, in a good place when it comes to this. The interesting thing is that this passage is actually directed not towards the secular, but actually towards Christians, because it says, quote, "having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof." This verse is actually directed towards churchgoers, towards professing Christians. Are we, as professing Christians, lovers of money, boastful, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents? Of course. Our contemporary American society is full of this, and our contemporary American society is full of Christians who do not obey the truth, who do not live the way that they ought. And they are these people. These are the people that Paul talked about in this verse. So that is the first sign that human character will decrease as time goes on. The second thing is this, is that there will be church corruption and apostasies. In 1 John chapter 2, verses 18 through 19, it says, "Little children, it is the last hour. And as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come, by which we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out, that they might be made manifest that none of them were of us." And In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 3, it says this. This is a very famous verse. It says, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not," that's the day of the Lord, "will not come unless the falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition." I'm not going to focus on that just yet, the son of perdition. What I want you to focus on is this. It says, "It will not come unless the falling away comes first." So in the last days, we're going to see incredible church corruption and apostasy. And when it comes to the 1 John verse, when it talks about the Antichrist, there's one thing you have to understand about the spirit of Antichrist. The spirit of Antichrist can only really exist where Christ has preached, where Christ has been preached. You can't be against Christ if there was no Christ there in the first place. And this spirit is what directly opposes the true church. And so we know that and we know according to these 2 verses that over time, as we get closer and closer, there's going to be a falling away. There's going to be a lot of apostasy. In fact, the very word in 2 Thessalonians that is, quote, falling away, that those 2 words, falling away, in the Greek are denoted as, in Greek it is apostasia. And that translates to apostasy, which by definition is defection from the truth. So it says that day will not come unless the apostasy comes first. The defection from the truth comes first. And do we see a lot of defection from the truth today? Certainly. There was a lot back then, but I can make the argument that there's even more now. How many so-called Christians deny that Jesus Christ is God? How many so-called Christians say that you can become a God, you can ascend to godhood? How many Christians say that Jesus Christ never rose from the dead? There's a lot of modern-day apostasies. There's a lot of scholars, eminent scholars, who deny basic Christian beliefs. They deny the resurrection. They deny the virgin birth. They deny Jesus' miracles. They say it's all metaphorical. That's what they say about it. There's a lot of apostasy going on. It's only going to get worse and worse. There's going to be more and more deviation from the truth as time goes on. The third thing is, and we're going to be looking at examples from the Old Testament about this, but the first reference that we have from here first is coming from Matthew 24, verses 37 and 39. So let me read that first and explain. Jesus says this. He says, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." This is incredible, because what it tells us is that really nothing ever changes. It's always the same. But also, in a way, this tells us what we can expect. And what we can expect is that the last days will be just like the days of Noah, just like how it was in the days of Noah. So, what was it like in the days of Noah? Well, the first thing is that the earth was filled with violence. Genesis 6:11 says, "The earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence." Do we see a lot of violence in our contemporary world? Of course. The 20th century was by far the most bloody century that we have ever seen. 100 million killed by communism. Mao, I think, alone killed 100 million. Stalin killed, I don't know, maybe like tens of millions of his own countrymen. Hitler, the Holocaust, and all the war that he caused. Our society is permeated with violence. How much do you see in the cities, in our American cities, that people are getting stabbed, people are getting shot? Look at how violent Chicago is with all the gangs there. Look how violent Philadelphia is with all the gangs there. New York, all these different places, they are filled with violence, and it's only going to increase. It says that the earth was filled with violence. So we can expect violence in the end times. And also, not to mention the gangs, but also the school shootings, the atrocities against children. All these different things. All of this falls under the section of violence. Violence certainly is an aspect of what the end of what we are in store whenever we're coming closer and closer to the end times. So the more violent and violent this earth becomes, the closer and closer we come to the end. What else do we have from the days of Noah that we can understand about this? Well, this doesn't necessarily come from the days of Noah per se, but it comes from Genesis 19 verses 1 through 11. And there's another thing I want to point out. In another verse, I don't know if I have it prepared. It says we'll get to it. Yes, but in Luke 17, it talks about how in the days of Lot, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. We're going to look at that right now. We're going to look at Genesis 19, verses 1 through 11. And this is the account of Sodom and Gomorrah. But before we do that, once again, I have to explain why. The second aspect that permeated Lot's day, that permeated Noah's day, was sexual perversion and violent homosexuality. In Genesis 19, verses 1 through 11, it says, "Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them. He bowed himself with his face towards the ground. And he said, 'Hear now, my lords, please turn in to your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet, that you may rise early and go on your way.' And they said, the angels, 'No, but we will spend the night in the open square.' But he insisted strongly, so they turned in to him and entered his house. Then Lot, he made them a feast, and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house, and they called to Lot and said to him, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them carnally.'" In other versions, "know them carnally" simply translates that we may have sex with them. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters whom have not known a man." Basically, they are virgins, they never had sex. "Please, let me bring them out to you, that you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof." And they said, "Stand back." Then they said, "This one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." So they pressed hard against the man Lot, and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. So basically what happens here is that the angels, they shine a bright light, and they cause those, it's assumed they shine a bright light, and that these men who are seeking to basically rape these 2 angels, they were blinded, and they can't find the 2 angels anymore. But this is a picture. This is a picture of what it's going to be like in the last day. Violent homosexuality, violent sexual perversion. This is what happened in Sodom. That is something that happened in Sodom. That it says all the men of the city, both young and old, they went out so that they might know those angels carnally. And what does Lot offer? He offers them his daughters. And he says, "Take them and do with them what you wish. Just don't do these things to these angels." But even still, they didn't want to have anything to do with women. They wanted those men. So that's another aspect of what it's going to be like at the end of time. We're going to see violent sexual perversion, violent homosexuality. And here's a few other things I want to say about that. Sexual perversion is a series of steps downward. If we look at our contemporary culture in recent history, how has this happened? Well, there's something called the sexual revolution happened in the 1960s, where teenagers and young adults were rebelling against the societal norms of sexual purity. And so that started, and so they rebelled, and they entered into fornication, and that's whenever the fornicating culture was really born, I would say. Secondly, pornography actually, it started in the 1920s, but it started really growing and was popular, and it was made popular in the 1960s. And that's where it all started. And so now, when we look at 2020, we see that pornography is very widespread. It's all over the internet. It's not easy. I mean, that's not difficult to find. It's very accessible. And so we see that pornography usage is growing and growing and growing. I think a statistic came out, something like 9 out of 10 um, uh, young men have seen pornography in their lives. So this is something that runs rampant through our society. What's the third thing? Well, after you get fornication and pornography, you then descend even more into homosexuality. And in our culture, this was something that was really starting to um, take get traction in the 1980s, whenever there was a bunch of social protests about allowing homosexuality, open homosexuality. When we look at the 2010s, the last decade, we see that the pride parades really took off. We see that homosexual marriages were legalized. We see that that this is something that is very open. We see that homosexuality is very open. Once again, with the pride parades, and currently, um, it's even, if you noticed, it is even blending with the BLM movement. So homosexuality is becoming loud and clear and very vocal in our society today. Uh, and another thing, the fourth step down after homosexuality is bestiality. This is something that is going on in pornography. Um, when it comes to this, this is something that grows out of the dark imaginations of men's hearts, and this is something that takes root in pornography. That's the next step down, I would say. When it comes to, and it happens, bestiality does happen. I don't want to give any examples, but I'm just going to say that I've heard stories. Anyway, number 5, this is a big one. Child pornography and trafficking. This is something that we are seeing more and more rampant. This is something that the justice departments and the and the law enforcement agencies of the world, they're trying to combat child pornography and trafficking. I think trafficking in a way has always been around. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I didn't do my research too well on that. But I certainly know that child pornography is around. And so once again, this is all a result of the sexual immorality and perversion that is going on in our country. Once again, these are just steps down, one after another. If homosexuality isn't going to satisfy you, what's next? A child, right? This is the dark path that sexual sin takes. Next, what's next? Well, transgenderism and gender confusion. Now we don't know the difference between a boy and a girl in our society. That's sarcasm right there, or irony. Maybe that's a better term. But yes, that's another aspect. That's another step down. And finally, what I have written down is that the nuclear family model is being disrupted. In fact, BLM, in one of their sites, I think it was BLM LA, mentioned on their website that they are devoted to disrupting the nuclear family model. And so we see that this current society is at war with a man and a woman producing beautiful children and raising them in a godly fashion. And so they don't want to have that. They want to have homosexual marriages. They want to put kids with homosexuals and to have them raise them. And this is the society that we live in. This is the society that this is a society that's sexually perverted, and it's going to get worse and worse. All this stuff is going to increase in intensity. So that's another aspect of where we are at the end time. So I'll ask you, are all these things happening in our society? Well, yes, we are becoming a very sexually perverted society. In fact, apologist Frank Turek, who I respect his work, said that the new god, the new idol in our current society is the god of sex. And I would have to agree with that, because a lot of social issues that we deal with, abortion, homosexuality, all of it's related to sex. Anyway, another aspect of the signs of the end times is materialism. Are we a materialistic society? You bet you better, acknowledge it. You bet we are a materialistic society. If you look at Luke 17, Luke 17, chapter 17, obviously, verses 26 through 30, it says, And this is Jesus speaking. And as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on that day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. So all these people, they were not aware of the spiritual. They were very carnal. They were very materialistic. They were focused on the now and what was material. Materialism is a very big is a very big thing throughout our culture. It permeates through our culture again. And our Western culture is very materialistic. I think it's very clear. The next thing is the fruition of Israel. This is a very interesting part of this. Because of Israel, we can really get a good grasp of where we are at with perspective to the end times. Because there's a lot of Old Testament prophecies that were fulfilled regarding Israel. And we're just going to be looking at a few of them. First of all, in Matthew 24, verse 2, Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things?" He's referring to the temple. He's saying, "Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." So very clearly there, Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple, and it happened. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Next, the Jews, it was predicted that the Jews would be scattered among all nations. In Ezekiel 12, verse 15, it says, "Then they shall know that I am the Lord, when I scatter them among the nations and disperse them throughout the countries." And again, this is reinforced with Leviticus 26, verses 36 through 39, which adds to that persecution and oppression. And it says, "And as for those of you who are left, I will send faintness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies." So once again, they are scattered to the lands of their enemies. "The sound of a shaken leaf shall cause them to flee. They shall flee as though fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when no one pursues. They shall stumble over one another as it were before a sword, when no one pursues. And you shall have no power to stand before your enemies. You shall perish among the nations." Again, once we see that. "And the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And those of you who are left shall waste away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands, also in their fathers' iniquities which are with them, they shall waste away." So once again, we see that there will be persecution and oppression of the Jewish people. Have we seen that? Just look at the Holocaust. And once again, the Jews were dispersed. This is something that happened in AD 70 when the Romans came and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. That is whenever the Jewish nation was taken away, was destroyed. And that's when the Jews were scattered to all the nations around the earth. Now, the Bible then predicts that the Jews would be regathered again to their nation. In Isaiah 11, verses 11 through 12, it says, "It shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left. From Assyria to Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations, and will assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." That's very significant because, someone may say, well, this is just speaking about how the Babylonians were about to come and destroy them, or how the Assyrians were coming and were about to destroy the nation and scatter all the Jews. But it says at the end, from the four corners of the earth. That means from around the entire earth. This could not have been fulfilled until this century, when it comes to travel, when it comes to all the airplanes, when it comes to all the means of transportation we have. This would have not been possible, really. This verse could not have been fulfilled until the modern day technology we have when it comes to travel. And finally, in Zechariah in Zechariah 10, verses 9 through 10, it really gives us a picture that this was something that was fulfilled when in 1948 Israel was reborn. Because once again, how could all the Jews that were scattered throughout all the nations come back to their homeland if they had no homeland? When Israel was rebirthed in 1948, that was huge in the prophetic realm, if that's what you want to call it. And it says, in Zechariah. It says, I will sow them among the peoples, and they shall remember me in far countries. They shall live together with their children, and they shall return. I will also bring them back from the land of Egypt, and gather them from Assyria. I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon, until no more room is found for them. So once again, it just tells us that there is going to be a regathering, uh, and this regathering could not happen until the Jews were scattered to all the nations around the world, and until the Jewish homeland was restored, so that all of them might come back. Why is this all important? Well, because very simply, Israel's birth in 1948 really starts the end time clock. There's a lot of prophecy that is yet to be fulfilled, and bear in mind, these prophecies that I'm about to read could not have been fulfilled unless Israel exists. It says in Zechariah. So once again, this gives us a grounding as to where we are in prophecy. These prophecies that I'm about to read are directly up ahead. It says in Zechariah 12 verses 2 to 3. It says, wait, hold on, I made a mistake here. Yes, it says in Zechariah 12 verses 2 to 3. I don't have that actually. Let me just quickly pull it up. So sorry about that, but anyway, continuing. I'll read it though, but it says so once again, the first few things that are immediately up ahead for Israel that need to be fulfilled is, first of all nations will come against Jerusalem. It says in Zechariah 12 verses 2 to 3, it says, Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples, when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will be surely cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. So note, it says all nations of the earth are gathered against it. It says also, Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, when your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. And that comes from Zechariah 14, verses 1 through 2. So right there, we just very clearly see that what is immediately up next is that all the nations of the world would come against Jerusalem. Now, what might cause that? Well, let me just give you a suggestion. Imagine if the U.S.'s support of Israel is dismantled. What does that mean for Iran? What does that mean for the surrounding Islamic nations that want to destroy Israel? I'll just leave you with that thought, but it's very interesting to see that. What's next? It says in Zechariah 12, verses 10 through 14, this is now the next section. The next thing that is going to happen is going to be the supernatural revelation of the Messiah, and this is detailed. And it says, And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. That's Jesus. Jesus is the one who was pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his holy son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. In that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, like the mourning at Hadad Rimmon, in the plain of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn, every family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the house of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the house of Levi by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of Shimei by itself, and their wives by themselves. All the families that remain, every family by itself, and their wives by themselves. So right there, it says that the Messiah, Jesus, is going to be supernaturally made manifest to Israel. Has this happened yet? No, it has not, but it's immediately up ahead. And finally, the Messiah will come in glory. Those are the three, and I'll read the reference. But once again, those are the three things that are to happen. All the nations that are immediately up ahead, all the nations will come against Jerusalem. There is going to be a supernatural revelation of the Messiah, and the Messiah will come in glory. And this is detailed in Zechariah 14, verses 3 through 5, and it says, "Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations," referring to those who come against Jerusalem, "as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two, from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move towards the north, and half of it shall move towards the south. Then you shall flee through my mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach to Azal. Yes, you shall flee, as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah. Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you." So right there, we see what is up to happen for Israel. So once again, let me go over that. What is happening with Israel? Well, we see that their second temple was destroyed. We see that they were scattered to all the nations right after their temple was destroyed. They were persecuted and oppressed in the foreign nations, but when Israel was rebirthed, those Jews started to be regathered from all nations. Immediately up ahead, all the nations are going to be against Jerusalem. There's going to be a supernatural revelation of the Messiah Jesus, and the Messiah will come in his glory. And so the conclusion of all of this, these five signs that we see of human character decreasing, of church corruption and apostasy, of the days of Noah and Lot um, being around here, with the sexual immorality, with the materialism, with the violence, and how Israel stands in the prophetic I think it's very clear that we are close to the end fruitioning, and morally we are degrading every single year. The world is becoming more and more like Sodom and Gomorrah, and uh, Israel is in a perfect position to having the rest of those prophecies being fulfilled. And so I think it's clear that once again we are close to the end, and because we are close to the end, we need to be prepared for it, and that's exactly what this series is going to be dealing with. So those are the signs of the times. I think we are very near, and I also think that we as Christians need to be prepared for what is up ahead. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope that this was edifying, and I will see you in the next part.